So the type conversion is that which converts from one data type into another one. For an example, so in C we have studied two kind of a type conversion. The first one we can call it as the implicit type conversion, and then the second one which we call it as the explicit type conversion itself. Okay, so the implicit type conversion you need to that it is the responsibility of the developer or the programmer to explicitly convert from one type into another type. So whereas in case of a implicit type conversion, it is the responsibility of the C++ compiler to convert from one type to another type. So that is why, so for an example, converting an integer to a float or converting a float into the double itself. This can be done either by using the implicit type conversion or can be done by using a explicit type conversion. So the type conversion is that which automatically converts one data type into another one, and we can store a large data type into the other. So for example, so we cannot store a float into an integer because float is being greater than int. So that means what? So if an float is going to take, let's call 4 bytes, and an integer is going to take 2 bytes, then the float cannot be occupied into the integer one. But however, since the integer 2 takes 2 byte and the float takes 4 byte, so that is why the the integer can be converted into the float, but the float cannot be converted into the integer one. So that means a data type which is having a bigger memory requirement, so that cannot be converted into another data type which is having a lesser memory requirement. Okay, then so there may be situation also will come across when there is going to be a conversion is being required between the two incompatible types. For an example, so right now we have not studied something called as a class. So over a period of time, once we discuss the classes and objects, so we will be specifically focusing on the three types of type conversion in to C++. So what is the first one? The first one is that so we can convert from a basic type to a class type. The second one is we can see the conversion from a class type to a basic type. Then the third one is we can see the conversion from one class type into another class type. Now let's look at with a small example here. That means what we are being primarily talking about. So I will not write down the detailed code as such. So but just I just wanted to give you some heads up into this so that at a later point of time.
The screen is not shared.
Oh, screen is not shared. Okay. Okay, so I was talking about this, the type conversion, which I have spoken of just now. So this is basically talking about this. So these are the three things which I have been talking about. So right now, let's look at it with an example here. So conversion from a basic type to a class type. So for an example, suppose some integer what you have defined here. So then we have a class which is being written something called as employee, and there is some defined within that itself. Let's assume that this is what has been defined. So the basic type to a class type means, so when we are going to create an E, then this is what will be conversion is going to happen here. So is the first time it's clear what is meant by the conversion of basic type to a type? Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes,
now
sir.
second thing is conversion from a class type to a basic type. So in this case, we will do just the reverse out of. So this is what we're going to do it. That means E is nothing but an object which is going to be created for the class employee, and that object will be assigned into the basic type itself. That means this one, the second one is being a reverse of the first one. Is this also clear? Is it clear?
Yes.
Okay. Then the last one. The last one is something conversion from a one class type to a another class type. So that means what we are trying to tell here. So let's call this is something which I have written a customer. Okay. Then what you will do? So these are the two things I need. So we can say the customer C is equal to E. That means this is a conversion in which the class of one time is being getting converted into the another class type. So in this case, C is becoming an object of type customer and E is nothing but an object of type employee. Okay, this is what we are going to study. In the other case, we can also write something called as E is equal to C here. So these are the three type conversion which we'll primarily focusing on once we are done with the classes and object. Okay, am I clear to everyone?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's understand what is the difference between a type conversion and typecasting. Sorry, the first statement that I have told it is nothing but a typecasting. That is the implicit typecasting and explicit typecasting. Okay, so I mean the implicit one and the explicit one. So when a user convert the one data type into another one, then it is called a typecasting. Remember, the type conversion is being performed by the compiler, but a casting is being done by the user itself. So when we use the type conversion, then it is what is being called as a promotion, and when we use the type casting means that converting a larger data into another one, and it is being called as a demotion. So when we use the type casting, we can possibly lose some of the data itself. So is the definition is being clear? Because I have not explained you with an example, so that is why, so once we have understood this, then we'll be able to clearly make it out the difference between a type conversion and also with a typecasting. So for the time being, we just need to assume that the type conversion is nothing but is called as a conversion, and the other one, that is the typecasting, which is being basically called as a demotion. So the typecasting, the implicit typecasting or the explicit typecasting, which you have studied in C, that is what has been something different in comparison to the type conversion. Okay. Now let's call what is meant by the strictly type checking. So basically C++ uses very strict type checking. So that means a prototype must be known for each function which is being called, and the call must be matching the prototype. Okay, that means what it is trying to tell here. So let's consider a simple program over here. So this is a integer main is being written here, and then a printf statement is being written here. So this program basically does often the compiler under C, even though with a warning that printf is not a known function. So that means what it is trying to tell is that, so in this the int main function which has been written over here. So if you run this program in C, so this may throw you a print a warning message. Warning message means is what? So the printf function which is being used over here, this printf function has, you need to include the header file for the printf function. That means the stdio.h header file need to be included. But even the if you exclude the stdio.h header file in case of a C program, then the program may compile and also may run, but it is going to give you a warning message that the printf function is not known function. Okay, so but many C++ compiler. Okay, so when we try to compile this, then this is what is going to fail it, because it is going to clearly tell that the header file which is being called as the stdio.h need to be included in the program itself. Okay, so am I clear what is meant by a very simple definition of a strict type checking? Am I clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yes.
Sir, can you again explain, sir?
So a very is being written here. So if you run the simple program in C compiler, it will compile and it may also run. But while running, it may give you a warning. The warning, so the function which has been used here to print the message into the output device, and this is what is being lacking a function called as the printf. That means the printf is not a known function, is the warning the the C compiler will produce. But when we try to run the same program in a C++ environment, this since C++ exhibit a strict type checking, it will throw an error. The error will say that the printf function is not defined. And that is why you need to compile to include the stdio.h header file. What it is trying to tell is that if a program use inbuilt function, then it is mandatory to include the header files. So if you exclude it, then it will what will result into a compile time error. Am I clear now?
Yes, sir, clear.
Okay. So the next thing what we'll do, we're going to study something called a namespace. So in the lab class which I have conducted, so in the lab class we have not discussed in detail on what is meant by the namespace. So we will be primarily focusing here on what is meant by the namespace here. So consider a situation when we have two persons with the same common name. So let's call is the common name is the name of the two persons. Okay, in the same group. So whenever we need to differentiate them, definitely we will like to use some additional information along with their name, like their either the area if they live in different area, or the mother's or the father's name, etc. So let's consider the same example here. So let's call the two students in your class is being having the common name, or three students having the common name. Then if I have to make it out or need to call it out, I cannot simply call it by the name, because if I'm going to call it by the name, the three students will confuse. That means which name I am calling out for. So in such a cases, you know what the strategy I can apply it? I can either apply it, I can either call them by the roll number, or whose room is being coming up first, ask I will ask, or I will call them as Jara one. Then the next person's, I mean the next student who is being matching with the same name called Jara, I will call him or her as Jara two, and then I can call it with a Jara three. So that is with some sequencing fashion we can call the names itself. The other alternative is that, so if the three persons or the three students belongs to different area of location, or let's call one of them is being from the West Bengal, or let's call one of them is from Kolkata, the second one is from Jaipur, and the third one is being from, so let's call from Lucknow. Then I can call Jara from Lucknow, so please raise your hand. Or similarly, Jara from Kolkata, please raise your hand. Then the Jara from something else, please raise your hand. So that means there is another way by which by the location where they lives or where the parent lives, I can call them out itself. So the same situation can also arise in C++ application. So that means, for an example, you might be writing some code that has a function called as the AUG, and there is another library which is being available, which is also having the same function name called as the XYZ. So that means in this case, what's happening is that, so the XYZ is a becoming a user defined function which you have defined it within your program, but at the same time you have also included a header file, and that header file is also having a function name called as the XYZ. So now if you call a function called as the XYZ, then the compiler does not have any clue that which version of the xyz function has been getting referred in the respective code itself. That means in this case what is being happening, so the function's name, the two functions are sharing the common name itself. So therefore a namespace is being designed to overcome this difficulty, and it is being used as a additional information to differentiate the similar functions, to different the similar classes, or even if it is to different the similar variable with the same name which is being available in the different libraries. So using the namespace one can define the context in which the names are being defined. So essentially in a the way we can say that the namespace is a methodology, or a namespace is a mechanism by which it is going to define a scope. So in order to explain or in order to understand, from the programming perspective, so let's first understand how do you define a namespace here. So a namespace definition is basically begins with the keyword called as the namespace, and then after that you can basically provide the name of the namespace. So that is why you can see it here. So the keyword called as the namespace has been used here, and then the namespace underscore name. So this namespace underscore name is the name which you wanted to define it as a namespace here. Then this is what is being the code that you will be writing it out itself. Then to call the namespace enabled variation of the either function or with a variable, so we need to prepend the namespace name as follows. That means in this case what has been happened here, so this is what is being a name, this is what is being the namespace name, and then this is what is the either the class name or the function name or the variable name. This is what we need to use it. So that is why, so in order to use this we need to use an operator which we can call it as the double colon. Okay, it is a single column, there is a one more single column, then we can make use of it by using a double column itself. Okay, so now let's look at it with an example here. So in this example, so we have defined a namespace called as the first space. Then in the first space we have defined a function called as the func. Then we are just printing out a message called as inside first underscore space here. In the similar fashion we have defined another namespace called as second underscore space, and within the same function we have defined a function which name is being exactly matching with the function which is being defined in the namespace first. Okay, then we have written some of the messages here. Now we are going to in the integer main function. Now remember this, so when the integer main function is being called here, if you simply call func function here, the compiler does not have any idea on which function has to be called up. So that is why to get rid of this, the namespace is going to be comes over here. So that means the first underscore space is nothing but the name which is being associated with the namespace. So we will call the func function which is being defined on the first underscore space by like this. So first underscore space, then the double colon, then func. So by this the compiler will eventually look out for the existence of the first namespace, and then in the first namespace it will look out for the existence of the function called as the func. Then it is what is going to be called up. Similarly, so if the func function is being defined in another namespace which is being called as second underscore space, then this is what is the another, I mean the to call the func function which is being defined in another namespace as well. So this is what is the way that needs to be derived. So what is the message that we can carry out from here? One can avoid prepending of namespace with the using namespace directory. So that means what it is going to try to tell here is that, so let's call, if we use something called as using namespace first underscore space, then the using namespace let's call second underscore space. This is what is being the other alternative one. But if you call the func function, then the function will not be, let's call, will not be worked out for. So that means let me just try to write it down here, the a small snippet of the code itself. So let's call, this is the one which you have already been defined it. So what we need to do, so let's call, if I'm going to use something namespace and then the first space, then something called as the a second space. So let's call, this is what we have used. So in the int function, main function, if you write something called as the funcs, return 0 and this, then the compiler will fail to understand whether the font function which is being defined either has to be called up from this or this. So it will, what will result into a confusion to the compiler. So when there is a confusion to the compiler will report it as a error. So this is what is being the statement, what it is trying to do. One can always avoid pre-pending the namespace with the using namespace directive. So the directive tells the compiler that the subsequent code is being making use of a names in the specified namespace. So that means there is an alternative way also. What we can do is that, so we can use the namespace something called as a first space, then integer main function, and then func we can call it out. So with respect to the example here, if we can omit this statement, let's call comment out this statement, what will happen? So this is what is the namespace is being there, and this function will likely to is going to execute correctly. But only when there is a confusion or the function with the same name with the same parameter has been come across, then when we are going to use this, then definitely we need to make the code as the first underscore space, double colon, and then the function name. Okay. So am I clear on what is the namespace with respect to this example? Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then something called as a nested namespace. So the namespace can be nested, where you can define one namespace inside a another namespace as follows. That means in this case what we are trying to do, there is a namespace which has been defined here, then this is what is being the outer namespace name, then we can define some code declaration here, and within the outer one we can also define a another inner namespace here. So in this one we have given something called as a underscore name2 here, then also this is what has can to be defined here. So the members of a nested namespace can be accessed by using the resolution operator. So the resolution operator means, so this is what we are going to study it as now. So that means we are going to use using namespace underscore one, then the resolution operator here, this is what we call it as the namespace underscore name2. So this is what needs to be used in order to access the code which is being written under this. But however, to access the code which is being written under the namespace one, then we can simply say using namespace, then name of the namespace here. Okay. So is the code is being clear, what is meant by the nested namespace? Is it clear what is meant by the nested namespace?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then there is a example is being given here. So let's call this, what we have done here in this case. So we have created a namespace something called as a first underscore space. So is the first underscore space is being treated as a outer namespace. Then under this we have defined a function called as the func. Then under the func function we have just writing a cout statement with the inside first underscore space. Then after which we have defined a, we have nested a another namespace here. So then it is what is being namespace, then second underscore space. Then in this case we are defining something called as a void func, that is the, I mean the same function name with the same parameter with the same return type is also being getting used here itself. Then we are being telling that inside say second underscore space here. Now we need to invoke the function called as the func, which is being resides on the second namespace. So in order to do that, what we need to do, we can use the using namespace, that is the common thing. Then first underscore space, because a compiler cannot reach out to the second underscore space unless until it reaches to the first space. That is why the first underscore space is going to be there. Then the resolution operator, because this operator is being resolving the say or trying to identify the existence of a nested namespace. So that is why, so the first space, then the resolution operator, then the second space. Then in the integer main function, what we can do, so we can simply call the func function. So when the func function is being called out for, so this the output called as inside second underscore space is going to be printed here. Okay.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, why we cannot write namespace second space in first function? Why we have declared, sir, second void function?
So this is a example to illustrate you the nested namespace. So if you have to call the func function here, then the second space, this one is not required. The resolution and the second space is not required here. That means it will take up the func function which is being defined in the first underscore space namespace. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay, so because our intention is to understand that how to invoke a function which is being defined in the nested namespace, that is why we have used the nested namespace here. Okay, I hope I am clear to everyone. Okay.
Yes, sir. Clear.
Okay. Then the next thing what we will discuss is being something called as a scope resolution operator. Okay, so the scope resolution operator is being treated up with a two double column. So that means earlier what we have seen so far, this is what is been called as a scope resolution operator. So we will be looking out some of the use cases on which the scope resolution operator will be useful. So the first thing what we are going to study, where the scope resolution operator is going to be helpful for us, and that one is being called as to access a global variable when there is a local variable with the same name. That is what is being the use case one or the scenario one. Now let's understand with respect to this. Now we have defined a global variable which is being called as the x here. That means whatever functions which is being defined under this, so all the function will have the access to the global variable. Now next thing what has been happened, so the next thing is that we have also defined here integer x is equal to 10 here. So in this case, integer x is equal to 10 here. So that means this integer is being local to main function. But what if we are going to simply refer it by x? What if you are going to simply refer it by x? So then in this case, what will happen if you refer to x, then it will just print out the local value of x. But however, in this function, we still want to access the global variable which is also being defined with the name called as the x here. So either may with the with this function, so if you want to access the global variable, then we have to explicitly make use of the scope resolution operator. So in this case it will say the cout value of global x is being nothing but the scope resolution operator and then x here. Okay, so am I clear on this? Is it clear? the scope resolution operator use case one.
Sir, what is the work of global variable?
So the look, what is the work of a global variable, isn't it? So the global variable work is that it should be access to all the functions which is being defined in a function. If any function has altered the value, then the reflection will be happen across all the function in the program. But in case of a local variable, if the value has been changed, then the reflection will happen only onto that local variable. The reflection will not happen to other functions because the other function does not have access to the local variable in a given function. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then the second thing is that so the use of a scope resolution operator use case number two is arises when we need to define a function outside of a class. Now let's define it. So let's call the same thing has been happened here. We are defining a class here, and in the class there is under the public access specifier we are just declaring the function here. The definition of the function does not appear in the class A. That means what we intend to do, we intend to ensure that we are just going to declare a function within the class, and the definition of the class has to come outside of the class itself. So that is why this is what has been done here. So we are just defining a few and found function, then the definition of the found function has come up outside of the class. So that is why we have written void, because the return type of the function is being void here. Then a is nothing but what this a representing, the name of the class, then this code resolution operator, then the fun function, then we are writing cout, then func is being called up here. Then in the integer main function we are just creating a object of the type called as the class a here. Then using the object we are just calling the function called as the fun, and then we are returning a value of 0 here. Okay, so is this also clear to you, to all of you? Is this also clear to all of you? Boys
Yes,
side,
sir.
is this clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, girl side, is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then the third thing is that so we wanted to access a static variable. So that means a static variable which is being defined in a class, and we wanted to access it. Now let's try to understand this. So let's call a class test is being defined here. Then we do have a private member variable called as x, and there is a public member variable called as the y here. Then assume that we are going to have a function called as the func, and the func is being taking of a argument which name is being called as the x here. So what the comment which has been given here, the local parameter basically x hide the class member x. So it is not a here. So this is being x. Okay, so basically what it is trying to tell here is that so the local parameter x hides the class member called as the x. So we can still access it by using the scope resolution operator. So that means what we can do, so we can access the class static variable even though there is a local variable. So that means this is what is being a static variable. In order to access the static variable here, then what we will do, we will simply write it down, the name of the class name, then the scope resolution operator, and then the variable name. But so this is what is to access the static variable, the static private variable which is being defined within the class. Now just to print the whatever value that has been passed as an argument to this function, then we can simply call it as the value of local x is being x here. Okay, am I clear on the class definition? Is clear to all? The class definition is clear to all?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then what you will do, so we need to initialize the two variable here. So in the initialization, what has been done, so the all the static variable is going to be accessed using the class name followed by the scope resolution operator. So that is why we have written integer test, then scope resolution operator x is equal to 1, then we have written int, then the test scope resolution operator y, this is what will be equals to 2 here. That means the x, the value of x and the value of y is being getting initialized with some default values here. Then what you will do, we'll pass test of obj is the object which we are creating, then we are creating integer x is equal to 3, then obj, so the efficiency function we are just calling it with the value of the 3 here. Then what will happen, so see out, so the when we run this program it will tell value of static x is being 1 here, then we can also say it is also going to say see out value of local x is being called as the 3 here. Then finally what we will do, we can simply also going to print it down that what is the value which is going to be associated to the public variable which is being defined here. So that means in this case the test, then the scope resolution operator y, then what is the value which is being associated with it, then it will simply print the value of 2, it is going to be simply first it out over here itself. So am I clear onto this program? Is the
Yes,
program
sir.
okay? Very good then. Okay, then what I will do, the scope and the lifetime of a variable, that is what we are going to study. So what is meant by the lifetime? The lifetime of any variable is the time for which the particular variable outlives in memory during running of a program. So that means the lifetime means, I mean, what it is trying to tell is that how much time it is being residing into the main memory while your program is under the execution. That means till how long a period of time the variable is being residing into the main memory during the execution of the program. Then let's understand what is meant by the scope. The scope of any variable is actually is nothing but a subset of a lifetime. So that means a variable may be in the memory but may not be accessible through. That means what the scope is all about. So the scope means what it is trying to tell is that so the variable may resides into the memory, but your program will not be able to access to the variable which is still being residing into the memory. So that is why we always say that the scope is nothing but a subset of the lifetime itself. So the area of our program where we can actually access our entity, so that means the entity in this case is nothing but the variable, which is nothing but the scope of that variable. So let's call let's for an example, you define some variable within a function. So that means within that function the variable can be accessed, and once the function execution comes to the termination or being goes out of the function, that means those local variables are being gone out of the scope. So the scope of any variable can be broadly categorized into three categories. So the first one is being called as the global scope, the second one is being called as a local scope, and the third one which is being called as a functional scope. So we will be looking at it with the what is the definition of each of this scope itself. So what is meant by the global scope? So global scope means when a variable is being defined outside all function, it is then available to all the functions of a program and all the blocks program it contains. That means when you declare and define a variable immediately after the header file inclusion, then that variable is becomes a global scope. That means that variable is going to be accessible to all the function which is being defined in your program, then all the blocks which is being defined within the function itself. So that is why it is what has been called as a global scope. Then the next one is being called as a local scope. So local scope means is what? When the variable is being defined inside a function or being defined inside a block, then it is locally accessible within that block or within that function. And that is why it is being given them as a something called as a local variable. So let's understand what is meant by the a block here. Okay, so to understand what is meant by a block, so let me explain you something called as a with a function here. So let's call this is what is being a function which we have written here. So in this function we have written something x and then some program which has been written here. So in this case, this x becomes a local scope because the existence of the x is going to persist as long as the execution is with the function. So if the function has successfully terminated, then the scope, then the x will become out of the scope. This is what is being called as a one variation of a local scope, and this is what is being something called as the within the function. Then something called as a block here. Block means what? So I can simply write it like this, isn't it? So let's call this is what I can write it something like this. That means let's call here some other code is being here. So let's call some other code is being here. So that means the integer x which is being defined is being specific to this block. That means when this the program execution is under this block, then what is going to do is that so this variable x will exist. So once the program control comes out of this or bin comes out of here, then the a block level variable it goes out of the scope. Okay. So is the local scope is being clear to everyone? Is the local scope is being clear to everyone?
Sir.
Okay. Then the third one is being called as the function code, function scope. That means when a variable is passed as a formal argument, it is said to have a function level scope. So this is what we have already discussed in the C. So this is just to to revisit all the scope that we have studied in C. Okay. Then the next thing, don't declare local variable before use. Okay, that means why we should not be declaring a local variable before use. Now let's understand what this means here. Okay, so let's call this is what has been written here. So let's call integer x which I have declared here, and after this there are many pieces of code is being written here. Let's call this and then let's call many code has been defined here. Now lastly you wanted to do some operation here, so let's call x plus 10 here. This is an absolute okay code. What this is trying to tell here is that so let's call you do not declare a code unless until it is being used. That means what it is trying to tell, so these use cases the use of x is being becoming at the here. So that means it is trying to tell that you define it before it is going to be used here. Because what this is trying to tell, why you should not be doing this, declaring a local variable using them immediately may create unnecessarily increase their scope. So this decreases legibility and increase the likelihood of a error. That means this is possibly may increase the likelihood of a error. That is why so you are not supposed to declare a local variable before the uses here. Okay. Then the next thing, ordinary pointer and a reference variable. Okay. So a ordinary variable is a variable which can hold a value as like integer, float or character. It may be signed or it may be unsigned and can take different memory spaces as per their data type. So that means an integer in a 16 in a 32-bit operating system will take 2 bytes. An integer in a 64-bit operating system will take 4 bytes. Okay, it depends on the type of the operating system itself. So similarly, this is what is being called as a ordinary variable. The next one is being called as a pointer variable. So a pointer variable is a variable which holds the address of another variable, and it is obviously unsigned. That means a pointer variable never will have a value of 0 or will being less than 0. So that is why when we are going to define a pointer variable, so automatically the that means the pointer variable will ensure that it is not holding any value eh, which is being equals to 0 or being less than that of a 0. That is what is being called as a pointer variable. Then the last one is being called as a reference variable. When a variable is declared as reference, it becomes an alternative name from a existing variable. So that means a variable can be declared as reference by putting an this operator. So in the declaration here. Now let's look at it with an example here. So integer n is equal to 10 here. So that means in this case n is being representing a ordinary variable because it is what is being representing a data type called as the integer one. Then star of p. The star of p is being representing a pointer variable. So this pointer variable is always going to be unsigned in nature. Okay, that means it is what is expected to hold the address of another variable. So that is what it has been mentioned here. P is equal to nothing but the address of operator and then n here. That means the p currently will hold the value, the address in which the variable n is being stored here. So these two statements we have already been discussed or seen in C. That is why I'm not writing in the notepad here. So we'll come to the next point, which is being called as a reference variable. So in the reference variable, what we are trying to do, so we are trying to make it as a address of operator. So that is why the int address of operator ref is being nothing but equal to n here. So that means it is what it's trying to tell. It is trying to tell that the ref here is nothing but a reference variable, and this reference variable is expected or it is being a reference to the variable which is being called as the n here. Okay, so am I clear? So here also being defined. Here p is a pointer variable, n is a pointer is a ordinary variable. P stores the address of n, whereas n stores the integer value, and ref is the reference variable, and it is what is being nothing but a reference to n here. Am I clear on the three types of the variable? Is this clear on the three types of variable?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then comes up something called as a function here. Function we have discussed in the lab class. In the lab class, we have discussed the functions, so I will not discuss it over here. So I presuming that the function has been clearly called out in the lab class. We have discussed the new elements or the new things which were expected to know as a part of the function in C++ is being called as a inline function. So the inline functions are being also being discussed in the lab class. Then also we have discussed the recursive function, and in the recursive function we have categorically called out what is meant by the base criteria and what is meant by the what is meant by the progressive criteria. Then the recursive function is being primarily of two types. One of them is being called as a head recursion, and the second one is being called as a non-head recursion. So we cannot call it as a tail recursion. So I just wanted to come across with a definition called as the a non-head recursion. So let's try to understand the difference in between the head recursion and a non-head recursion. A function with a recursive call at the beginning of the path is being called as the head recursion. So that means what it is trying to it is trying to tell here is that, so once we have the a base criteria, then the progressive criteria is going to be at the beginning of the path, and which is that means the first statement which is being coming over here is being called as a progressive is a defining of a progressive criteria. That means the function which is being getting called here followed by some statement which is being happening. So that is why it is being called as a head recursion. What is a non-head recursion? The non-head recursion is just a swap over here. That means some of the computational step has been happening at the beginning, then the progressive criteria is being getting called up. So that is why it is what is being called as a non-head recursion. So is the difference is being clear? So the difference is being clearly. So if you swap the steps here, this is what it will be called as a recursive function, and if you swap it up, this is what is being called as a non-head recursion. So that means my progressive criteria is being getting called at the end of the statement itself. But however, so this progressive criteria is being called up immediately after the base criteria. Okay. So is this also clear to everyone? Is this clear? The difference between a head recursion and a non-head recursion?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Function overloading we have also discussed within the class itself. That means by changing the number of argument and also having a different types of the argument. This is what we have also discussed here. Function prototype. So the function prototype is being we have seen in C as well. That means the function prototype, what we are intending to tell here, it provides the compiler with a description of the function that will be used later in the program. So that means you are going to define a function after the main function. So if you have to achieve this, then we need to specify the function prototype in the beginning itself. Then it defines the function before it can be used or before it can be called. So the function prototype need to be written at the beginning of the program. So the function prototype must have a return type indicating the value that the function will be written here. So a few of the examples of the function prototype is being written here. So let's call double, then the squared is nothing but the name of the function, then what are the argument that is being taking up. So these are the few examples of a function prototype. Then a simple example on a function prototype. That means so the function prototype declaration has been come here. So let's call area here. So this area has been called up in the main function here. So remember this. So in this case, what we are trying to do, we are just declaring a function prototype here, but the definition of the function is expected to come only after the main function. That is why after the main function, this area function has been called up. So we have written float area underscore circle, then the rad is being nothing but the radius here. Then we are just taking the input on the radius, reading it, then calculating the area of a circle, then we are just flushing out the values of the area of the circle itself. Okay, so this type of program we have already done it in C. So the convention which has been used in C, the same convention also can be used in C++. Remember this function prototype is being required only when the function is expected to come after the main function, or the function is expected to be defined after the main function itself. Okay, so this is what is being the another example. So is the function prototype is clear to all? Is it clear to all?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, clear.
Okay, then what you will do, something called as a main function return value. So this also we have studied in the lab. So in the lab, what we have discussed is the main function is expected to return a 0. Okay, so it is being interpreted by the environment that the program has been successfully ended, so that the operating system will not do any monitoring activity to check whether the program has been successfully done its work, or it has been executed, or it has been abruptly it has been done with the task, so that it do not have to do any sort of a inspection to understand whether any fatal error or any kind of a barrier that has been come across for which some action need to be initiated. So that is why so main function always have to explicitly return a value which is being called as the 0 here. Okay, with this we are done. Okay, with this we are done with the second one. Okay, I have given some example here for your practice. So I'll be sharing this with each of you. Then you can try it out with the program, and then we can expand your programming abilities. Thank you. I'm done. Okay, any questions? Any questions?
All clear, sir.
No questions, right?
No, sir.
Okay, very good. Okay, so one thing I'm observing that the girls are not responding in the class. So in the today's class, I'm going to, so I will take another 5 minutes more. Then we'll be done with the class. Okay. I wanted to nominate two girls who is going to represent the girls here, and then another is going to represent girl CEO. CEO stands for Chief Entertainment Officer. So the girl is expected to share some jokes in the class so that the other students will get entertained. Okay. Now I'm going to call out a roll number here. Roll number 213, Nitish Kumar. Are you present? Okay, no response.
Yes, sir. Hello, sir. Sir, वो mic glitch हो गया था.
Okay, you nominate a seer from the girl side. Nitish Kumar has left the meeting. Very good. I will absent him in the class. Okay, very good. Then we will take another one. 2187. Roll number 2187.
Yes, sir. Brilliant.
You nominate a girl student who can play the role of a class representative.
Okay, sir.
You nominate a girl student who can be the class representative.
Okay, sir.
Quickly tell me now. So who all are present? So I'm sharing it now. Or I will randomly choose. Okay, no response. Very good. Roll number 1206. Roll number 1206.
Yes.
Many congratulations. You are the girls here. Okay. Now you need to know. So if I'm asking a question in the class, if no one is being responding, you should be the one to respond. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Nominate somebody. Okay. So who is being very talkative in the class among the girls, excluding
Sir, I
you?
don't know.
You
I
don't
don't know
know.
anyone of the class.
Why you
No,
don't
sir.
know?
Sir, we haven't met anyone, so how will I interact with others?
Okay, so you have never met anyone. Okay, that
Sorry?
means so you never interact with anyone in the class.
No, sir, it's not like that, but we haven't met everybody in person, so it's very difficult to choose anyone.
Okay, who is being your friend here in this class? Who is being a friend to whom you can trust?
Sir, I haven't talked to many people of the
Okay, so
class.
you might have talked to one student, a girl student. You might not have spoken to all, but you might have spoken to maybe one or two, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, please call out a name.
Sir, Shibani.
Okay, Sibani, can you please unmute yourself? She is present or absent?
Don't know, sir.
Check it out whether she is present or not. If she is absent, then you need to call out a different name then.
No, sir, she's absent.
She is absent.
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
so you are the girls here in the class. We need to nominate a boys here. Do you know anyone in the boy side?
No, sir, not
You do
exactly.
not know. Okay, very good. Roll number 227, Rohan. Are you present? Roll number 227, Rohan. Are you present? He has left it. Very good. Okay, roll number 2865.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you are the boys here in the class. Okay, in the next class, in the next theory class, you need to identify a girl CEO, and Anshika, you need to identify a boy CEO. These are the two tasks which has been given to you. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
2865. Samarth, am I
Yes,
clear?
sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm done with the class. Okay, that will give the attendance to all.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay then.
Thank you, sir.